Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are diving into a really fascinating piece of history, one that perfectly captures the magic, the sheer ambition, and, well, the eventual growing pains of America's thrilling industrial evolution. We're going to explore the rise and fall of the Evansville Suburban and Newburgh Railroad. Most folks just called it the ES&N. Now, at first glance, this might seem like a super hyper-local story about a tiny little rail line, but it's actually this brilliant microcosm of how technology, commerce, and culture rapidly collided at the turn of the 20th century. By following the life cycle of the ES&N, you're going to get a crystal clear picture of exactly how interurban transit transformed society right from the ground up. And there's a quote from the historical record that brilliantly illustrates our big overarching theme for today. It goes, "The charm of these railways is in how they brought faraway communities nearer, building connections and opening up chances for progress." I mean, think about it. Before we had massive interstate highways or commercial flights, these interurban lines were the absolute cutting edge of human connection. They linked towns, moved essential resources like coal, and gave everyday people a freedom of movement they had literally never experienced before. It's the story of how pure innovation physically redrew the map. So, part one, the interurban dream. Okay, let's dive into this. Back in December 1887, Captain Lee Howell and William J. Wood incorporated the ES&N, and they had a very clear dual purpose. They wanted to tap into lucrative local coal mines while also creating a commuter service for the town of Newburgh, which only had about 1,500 people back then. They saw a brilliant opportunity here to merge heavy industrial freight right alongside the needs of daily commuters. But of course, grand visions require serious capital. So Pigeon Township in Vanderburgh County actually voted to provide a staggering $60,000 subsidy to help build the line. But there's a catch. This money came with some incredibly strict provisions attached. The local government essentially forced the railroad to rapidly build a rail yard and shops, and they demanded that the ES&N employ no less than 200 men at any given time. Plus, they had to have the whole shebang fully operational in less than 2 years. And interestingly, this super aggressive timeline actually led the L&N Railroad to locate their shops in southwest Evansville, establishing an area that would appropriately be named Howell after the captain himself. Which brings us to Section 2, Steam and Early Success. That massive influx of public funding and those incredibly tight deadlines really kicked off a rapid build-out phase. And the founders? They met the challenge head-on. On August 1st, 1889, the ES&N proudly launched its initial passenger service to Newburgh, and the freight access to the coal mines just beyond the town limits followed super quickly right after that in November. So the initial completed track connecting Evansville to Newburgh measured precisely 10.98 miles long. Now, I know 11 miles might not sound like a sprawling transcontinental giant, but for the local economy and the folks living in these towns, that stretch of track was an absolute game changer. It was this vital artery that suddenly made regular travel and heavy freight transport incredibly efficient. And to handle this sudden surge in connectivity, their initial equipment roster was actually highly impressive for a startup. They kicked things off with 3 Baldwin dummy locomotives to power the runs. For the passengers, they secured 12 double-truck passenger trailers, 8 open and 4 closed, with the trucks built by the Mesker Steel Company and bodies by the Hercules Buggy Company. And for the freight side of things, they launched with 20 wooden coal cars, a flat car, and a caboose. They immediately scheduled 5 passenger trips a day, right alongside their heavy freight service. The immense scale and just the sheer momentum of these early operations were really spectacular. This sparks Section 3, Parks, Picnics, and Play. You see, the ES&N didn't just move coal. It actually triggered a massive cultural boom. Fine and gaiety suddenly became cheap and incredibly accessible, and the railroad actively started creating weekend destinations along the tracks that catered to literally every possible taste in society. You didn't have to just sit around your immediate neighborhood on your day off anymore. And this brings us to one of my absolute favorite historical contrasts. So on one hand, you had Captain John Gilbert's amusement park just east of Woodmere. Gilbert marketed this as the perfect, pristine spot for Sunday school picnics. He strictly mandated that no ardent spirits will be sold and required that all visitors maintain proper decorum. But on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, just a few miles down the line, was Barnett's Grove. This beautiful spot was purchased and developed by F.W. Cook, who, it just so happens, was a famous brewery owner and a prominent stockholder in the ES&N. He built Barnett's Grove as a lively rendezvous for those pleasure-bound, undoubtedly using the park to sell his beer and boost the railway's weekend ticket sales. The contrast between this rigid, alcohol-free Sunday school park and the brewery-funded party grove perfectly illustrates the amazingly diverse new society the railroad was serving. Oh, and if you rode the line all the way to the end, right into Newburgh, you'd find Kubler's Garden. Located just a few blocks north of the ES&N depot, it was widely considered the most famed recreational spot of them all. So the railroad wasn't just moving people to their jobs, it physically delivered them to their weekend escapes. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4, the electric expansion. By the early 1900s, the sheer volume of business was putting incredible strain on the old steam service. This prompted a massive technological upgrade. On May 4, 1905, the ES&N completely replaced its steam dummy trains with electric interurbans. The entire line had to be completely rebuilt. Heavier rails were laid down, new oak ties were installed, and the crossings were totally reconstructed just to handle the heavier, faster electric traffic. And with the power of electrification behind them, the ES&N officials set their sights on the rapidly expanding coal mining developments near Boonville. Now, despite the fact that the Southern Railway already served the area, they just pushed forward, completing the work by July 1906. They created a junction at Stockwell Woods, which we actually know today as Wesselman Park, and routed the tracks straight through Stevenson and Chandler. But what's truly remarkable here is the engineering. They maintained a maximum grade of just 0.1% on the Boonville segment. To put that into perspective, in any engineer's language, keeping a track that incredibly flat over varying terrain is an absolute engineering marvel for the time. This new electric era allowed for an incredibly liberal and reliable schedule. Departures ran every single hour from both ends of the line, from 6 a.m. all the way to 8 p.m., and they even threw in an extra late-night owl car for the night owls. It essentially became the lifeblood of the local workforce. Just picture this. The very first car leaving Boonville in the morning faithfully carried about 100 coal miners directly to their tough workings near Chandler. The railroad was operating at its absolute peak, effortlessly blending heavy industry with daily public transit. But, as we know, progress is relentless. Welcome to Section 5, the end of the line. As we move into the 1920s, paved highways and gas-powered bus services began to emerge, and sadly, the rigid track-bound interurban service started a slow, inevitable decline. People simply wanted the flexibility of roads over the set schedules of the rails. So the crucial point here is that while the automobile definitely weakened the railroad over time, it was a sudden, unpredictable disaster that truly sparked the end. A devastating fire broke out and completely destroyed the electrical substation on the Boonville line. Now, they tried to use a temporary flat car-mounted rotary converter, which they actually borrowed from a neighboring railway, just to keep things running. But the financial and logistical strain was just too much. This unpredictable fire was literally the final catalyst that doomed their electric operations. And what followed was the somber, piecemeal abandonment of the great ES&N. In 1930, passenger electric operations were officially abandoned. Boonville service ended in August, and Newburgh followed in December. The passenger cars were scrapped, and all those overhead electrical lines were torn down. The lines sort of limped on solely via freight for a while, but the industry is drying up. In 1941, the last of the coal mines on the Newburgh line ceased operation. Then, in 1947, the massive Boonville mine, which, by the way, had been generating 98% of the remaining railroad's revenue, was discontinued. And despite numerous passionate protests from local residents who desperately didn't want to lose their railway, the Interstate Commerce Commission granted the final abandonment in 1948. The track and materials were sold off as scrap to the Hyman Mickles Company, and just like that, the ES&N was gone. But history rarely vanishes completely, does it? Today, if you take a walk through the Wesselman Park Nature Preserve, you can still trace the legacy of the ES&N. The old Boonville and Newburgh trails still exist out there. And if you look closely, you can actually still spot the remnants of the old wooden railroad ties rotting quietly in the earth. It kind of makes you wonder, what other ghosts of past innovations, what other forgotten pathways of progress are hiding right now in your own local parks? The history of how we connect with one another is all around us, just waiting to be rediscovered. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep looking for the history hidden in your own backyard.